Michael Ignatieff, The Lesser Evil, Political Ethics in an Age of Terror, Gifford Lectures. In an age of terror, how can liberal democracies preserve their values while defending against threats? In The Lesser Evil, Michael Ignatieff tackles this question, exploring the balance between individual rights and collective security in the face of terrorism. The book delves into the dilemmas of protecting citizens without violating constitutional guarantees, the dual political spheres in liberal democracies, and the difficult choices made by governments when faced with moral ambiguity. Get ready to embark on an insightful journey as you navigate the complexities of political ethics and the challenging realities confronting democracies in a world under the shadow of terror.
Balancing individual rights and collective safety. In a liberal democracy facing a terrorist threat, the dilemma of protecting citizens while balancing constitutional guarantees of individual freedoms and rights arise. Liberal democracies operate on two political spheres, majority rule, and community powers that protect individual rights. However, a terrorist campaign endangers this delicate balance, leading to prioritizing national security over individual rights. Governments must take terrorist threats seriously, but weighing costs and benefits forces them to choose the lesser of two evils. An emergency is a temporary state, not a revocation of the rule of law. As ethical beings, we must justify difficult decisions between two morally questionable acts, particularly when governments present acts of violence as the means of reaching national goals. As such, the larger question revolves around what role human rights should play in deciding public policy during terrorist emergencies. Emergencies and their impact on liberal democracies. The essence of a liberal democracy is to protect citizens by allowing due process, constitutional rights, and the separation of powers. Its morality is maintained by an open free press and legislature. However, during national, territorial, or selective emergencies, laws can be suspended, and civil liberties curtailed. This action is intended to restore order and ensure public safety but disrupts constitutional protections and the rule of law. The use of executive prerogatives can also override the law, leading to a conflict in the interests of the majority and individual rights. To maintain a balanced approach, governments can detain terrorist suspects for review and access to lawyers but should not hold them indefinitely. The U.S. Constitution has only one reference to emergencies, intended to minimal opportunities to curtail individual rights. The Balancing Act, Liberal Democracies and Terrorism. Terrorism poses a unique challenge to liberal democracies and their simultaneous commitments to political realities, societal security, and constitutional law. Despite the threat of potential attacks, democracies avoid infringing on society's moral standards and individual rights. However, in national emergencies, they allow for constitutional dictatorships to maintain order. The war on terrorism presents a unique challenge as there is no clear endpoint or definition of victory. Democratic societies must continually weigh the practical approach of dealing with potential attacks against the more theoretical constitutional approach that protects individual rights. Overreacting to terrorism. Many liberal democracies have overreacted to terrorist threats since the mid-18th century, characteristically equating them to an invading army. The U.S. overreacted to the 1919 Red Scare, and some politicians had similar concerns during World War II. Governments need to be conservative about revoking civil liberties in the face of terrorist threats to avoid playing into the hands of terrorist groups. Terrorists often rely on attacking indiscriminately, and they hope that governments will react violently against agitators. This reaction to violence only furthers the terrorists' goals. For Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations, the goal is to destabilize governments and promote bad news about the enemy. However, liberal democracies lose ground if they restrict civil liberties too much, further empowering terrorists and leaving the country vulnerable to attack. Therefore, the best strategy is to avoid overreacting to such threats and remain free, holding on to the higher moral ground. Lessons from terrorist campaigns. The article highlights the history of terrorist campaigns in various countries and the lessons to be learned from them. It begins with Tsarist Russia, which was the first modern nation to fight a sustained terrorist campaign during its transition from monarchy to a contemporary economy. Anarchists staged attacks on civilians to bait the police into repressing the populace, with the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881 leading to repressive legislation and destabilizing Russia's government. The article emphasizes the need to distinguish moral condemnation from threat assessment to separate the anger we feel from the risk posed by terrorists. The article then moves on to Germany, which faced internal terrorists from 1918 to 1924 with both the left and the right seeking to take over the emerging democratic republic. However, the Weimar Republic did not end due to terrorism. In fact, Germany was too democratic and tolerant of the Nazis' clear goal of creating a dictatorship. Finally, the article discusses contemporary instances of terrorism that threatened governments in Peru, Argentina, Israel, Sri Lanka, and Colombia but failed to bring them down. The article suggests that terrorists often try to convince the public that constitutional rights are weaknesses and advocates for democracies to enforce individual rights, including constitutional guarantees and open borders, to fight terrorism while maintaining checks and balances. It concludes with the assertion that in a war on terror, the only enemy that can defeat a democracy is itself. Winning the war on terrorism. Terrorism is a form of politics that necessitates the use of appropriate words, messages, police tactics, and clear long-term political strategies. To defeat terrorism, you must first recognize the type of terrorists, their claims, and demands. When negotiating with terrorists, both parties involved must acknowledge each other's rights, without placing moral claims or history above one another. Established democracies have a dilemma when dealing with terrorists because they have previously used political violence against repressive governments, which is not a human right or part of the modern human rights tradition. Terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda have different aspirations compared to freedom fighters who attack repressive governments, as they have no intention of constructing a state and kill indiscriminately. A crucial part of winning the war on terrorism involves developing solutions that address grievances from inside a democratic framework. Western nations should support Muslim nations as they build more equitable societies.
Navigating the treacherous landscape of political ethics in an age of terror is no easy task. In The Lesser Evil, Michael Ignatieff delivers an insightful examination on how liberal democracies must strive to maintain a delicate balance between preserving individual rights and ensuring collective security. Throughout history, these entities have faced difficult choices, often opting for what they perceive as the lesser of two evils. Looking forward, it becomes crucial for democratic societies and their institutions to judiciously defend the rights of citizens against excesses brought on by the fight against terrorism. By engaging with the complexities presented in this book, readers can better appreciate the nuances involved in preserving our values and principles in a world fraught with danger and moral ambiguity.